When news breaks about an attack, are the words you're hearing just reporting the facts? Or are they telling you a story, kind of nudging you towards a specific point of view? This is the big question we're exploring today because the answer really changes how all of us see the world. To get to the bottom of this, we're going to be leaning on a fascinating piece of academic research. It provides a really powerful framework for picking apart the language used by the Spanish press after major terrorist attacks. And even though it focuses on Spain, trust me, the insights here are an incredible tool for anyone who wants to be a more critical reader of the news. Okay, so let's start with the book's foundational idea. The language you see in the news, it isn't a mirror just reflecting events as they happen. It's more like a picture frame. It's constructed very carefully to make us see things in a very particular way. And check this out. The author is incredibly direct about it. He argues that metaphors, comparing one thing to another, aren't just used by accident. They are deployed on purpose. And the goal? To get the public, you and me, to agree with a certain narrative, maybe without us even realizing we're being persuaded. So to build this case, the author isn't just reading newspaper articles and giving his opinion. No, he uses a specific academic toolkit that gives his analysis some real teeth. Let's take a look at what that is. This whole framework is called Critical Terrorism Studies, or CTS. And the core idea of CTS is kind of mind-blowing. It says that terrorism isn't an objective thing like a rock or a tree. It's a label that we as a society decide to apply to certain acts of violence, but not others. And usually, that decision is political. Understanding this is really the first step to seeing past the headlines. And this slide just lays out the difference so clearly. The mainstream view pretty much says terrorism is a simple, undeniable threat that needs to be eliminated. End of story. But the CTS perspective, the one this book uses, says, hold on a second. Who gets to decide what counts as terrorism? And that's not just some academic question. The answer to that shapes foreign policy and influences how we view entire communities. So here's the crucial point. Terms we think are really straightforward, like terrorist or victim, are actually, to use the fancy term, ontologically unstable. It's just a way of saying their meanings aren't fixed. They're slippery. They can be stretched or shrunk or molded to serve a political agenda, which is exactly why we have to be so aware of how they're being thrown around. All right, so we've got the theory down. Now, how does the book actually apply it? Well, it argues that in Spain, the media coverage of terrorism is shaped by two powerful, overarching stories. The first story is the Spanish transition to democracy. After the dictator Franco died, Spain had to completely rebuild its national identity. The book argues this whole historical experience created a very specific, state-focused way of talking about what democracy is and what threatens it. And honestly, every country has its own version of these foundational stories that quietly shape the news. And here's a really provocative twist. The author suggests the state didn't just defend itself from terrorism. It actually used the threat of terrorism to define itself, to unite people, and to strengthen its own power. It almost needed an enemy to define what its democracy stood for. That's a chilling idea, and you can see echoes of it all over the world. The second major story is, of course, the global war on terror. After 9/11, this narrative gave everyone a new language, a ready-made script for understanding political violence. And the book argues this script was quickly picked up and used in Spain, especially after the 2004 Madrid train bombings. So, with those two big narratives floating around, the author does this sort of linguistic detective work to see exactly how they pop up in the media. The method is called critical metaphor analysis, but you can just think of it as a 3-step toolkit for reading the news. First, you find the metaphors. Second, you figure out what they're trying to make you think and feel. And third, you ask the big question, why? Why was that specific metaphor chosen, and what political job is it doing? The analysis really zooms in on these keywords, and you'll notice they're all in single quotes. That's a totally deliberate choice by the author. It's his way of signaling that he's questioning their obvious meanings, that he's treating them as ideas that are being actively built by the press. And this slide is where the theory gets real. Calling attackers rats or lone wolves isn't just a description, it's a metaphor that frames them as less than human, as savage. Calling their actions evil completely strips away any political motive, right? It turns a complex conflict into a simple fairy tale of good versus evil. And once you start seeing people as animals or demons, it becomes a whole lot easier to justify almost any action against them. So, what's the big takeaway from all this? I mean, why does spotting these metaphors even matter for those of us who aren't linguistics professors? Well, here's the bottom line. All of these metaphors, they all work together to create this incredibly powerful us versus them story. In this story, we are the civilized, democratic victims, and they are the barbaric, evil, inhuman terrorists. And that narrative, the book argues, makes whatever the state does seem legitimate and necessary, while making the enemies seem completely beyond reason. The book's dedication is so revealing. It says, to freedom and intellectual self-defense. And that just reframes the entire point, doesn't it? Understanding how language is used to shape what we think isn't just some academic game. It's a fundamental tool for thinking for ourselves. It's about defending our own minds from manipulation. And that really leaves us with a final question to take away. The next time a crisis hits and you're reading the headlines, try to look past the surface. Ask yourself, what are the metaphors here? What's the story they're trying to sell me? And is it a story I want to buy?